Is there any evidence for God? We ask that a lot, and the answer always remains the same: no. So, what do the religious do? They try to change the definitions of words, they run around with the goalposts, and they pretend that actual evidence doesn't matter as long as you believe. Oh, and they want you to give a lot of money to the church. Can't forget about that. Let's go take a look at Robert Barron again for no real good reason other than he's there. Honestly, the more that I see him, the less impressed that I get. And this goes a long way toward that. This is just a con man lying for the Lord because what the hell else is new? So join me, won't you, on a journey through the irrationality that is Catholic beliefs. It's why they're hemorrhaging members so badly.
I think what most people get wrong when speaking of God is to imagine God as a big being.
No, it's to imagine that God exists at all. God is a concept in your head, something that you've adopted both because you were indoctrinated into it at a young age and because it strikes certain emotional chords that you really want to be true, even though you've got absolutely no evidence that it is. This is where religion, and it goes equally well for all religions, it's where they go completely wrong. Reality isn't about what makes you happy. It's about what is demonstrably and objectively true. Nobody cares about your fifis but you. Knock it off.
I look up in the night sky and I see stars and planets, and look around, I see animals and plants. I see the world of beings, of things. The great mistake is to say, well, he must be the biggest being around. He's the supreme being among the many beings of the world.
No, there's no reason to think that God, any God, exists at all. This is what happens when you start with an emotionally comforting conclusion and then pretend that you can just backtrack to objective reality. It doesn't work that way. God is only real if God is real, and all the wishes and dreams in the world won't affect that one way or the other. God is the world's biggest imaginary friend, nothing more. You have no evidence for anything else.
And that's precisely what God is not.
How do you know that? It is an honest question. You've got a book that says things about this supposed God of yours, but how did the people who wrote the book know anything? How do you know anything? Note, I'm not talking about your beliefs. I don't care about your faith. I'm questioning your knowledge. How do you know, and how have you tested that supposed knowledge to see if it stands up to any kind of critical scrutiny? And that's something they're not willing to address because they don't think about their faith in those terms. It's true because it makes them happy to think that it's true. And sadly for them, that doesn't make it true. It's just unfortunate how they can't work that out for themselves.
How often atheists, both old and new, will say something like, well, where's your evidence for God? If you imagine God as one more big contingent thing among others, well then there's no evidence for that reality.
But that's the problem right there. It's all imagination. That's all faith is. We're not asking what you imagine your God to be. We're asking you to justify your beliefs beyond your imagination and into the real world that you can objectively demonstrate exists. We don't care about your beliefs. We care about your facts. Got any of those? I didn't think so.
They're operating out of a scientific framework. But see, if you're looking for God that way, you'll never find him. That's not what he is.
How do you know that? We're still at the flapping lip stage. You haven't justified how you've rationally determined any of this is actually true. It's why people like Barron don't want to be grilled by the non-believers. I think he knows that he's on pretty shaky ground the second anybody who doesn't buy into his preconceptions asks any questions. It's why faith needs to be immediately off the table. It doesn't get you anywhere demonstrably useful.
God is the sheer act of existence itself, in and through which all particular things exist.
How'd you come to that conclusion? I mean, rationally. That's the problem, because they haven't. They don't even try. This is like somebody trying to describe the dragon in their garage. Oh, it's huge. It's at least 1,000 feet long, and it breathes fire, and it can go invisible at will. You know, all the stuff that they just yanked entirely out of their ass. It doesn't really matter if they believe it. Nobody in their right mind ought to believe it's true unless you can trot that dragon out of the garage and prove that it's real and can do all the things that it's been said to do. God doesn't get it out. Put up or shut up.
But people get caught up in misunderstanding God and therefore seeking Him in a sort of empirical, scientific way.
Because we have no other means of gathering objectively true data. If you think you can do that, go ahead and propose your methodology and we'll put it to the test. We have one and only one method, at least so far, that we have shown actually works. Therefore, that's what we're going to use unless you can prove something else works at least as well. And good luck on that, because you're going to need it.
That's not going to work.
Must be something that Barron said, because, he's not smart. No apologist is. Apologists are pushing a belief system, not a fact system. They are not able to demonstrate anything in their beliefs objectively, nor do they try. Just because you really like the idea, that doesn't prove the idea is true, and truth is all that we care about, or should. So, no, Barron isn't smart. In fact, he's probably one of the dumbest apologists around. I don't know, Daniel King probably gives him a run for his money, but, yeah. Anyway, let's give him some more rope to hang himself with, not like he needs it.
You know, the theologian Paul Tillich, who was one of the great Protestant theologians of the last century, he said, the word faith is the most misunderstood word in the religious vocabulary. And I've always felt that's right.
Mostly because you rely on it and you're trying to make it not look like the dirty word that it's come to be. Faith is nothing to be proud of. You just have to play make-believe because you don't really have a choice if you want to come to your emotionally favoring conclusions. Christians and other religions only have faith, and if faith fails, then so too does every single religion out there. This guy really isn't a big thinker, is he? He's a big believer, and big beliefs without evidence to back them up are completely worthless overall.
How do people read faith? Through a scientific lens or scientistic lens. Faith is credulity, it's superstition, it's accepting things on the basis of no evidence.
So you do understand what it is that you're doing wrong. You just don't care. That's the problem. He's aware of his problems, but he has a vested interest in ignoring that and running back to the mother church because that's how he makes a living. That's not something that you ought to be proud of. And no matter how many ways you twist the reality, it's not going to get any better. Knock it off.
It's the way a child thinks. That is not faith. That is indeed superstition, credulity, stupidity.
Yes, it is. Now, I'm sure he's going to run around with the goalpost for a while, but ultimately, that's what it all comes down to. It's belief for no good evidence-based reason just because you really want it to be true. Trying to polish a turd doesn't stop it from being a turd. Grow up.
The church, at its best, is calling people beyond that. We're not satisfied leaving people in a state of pre-rational superstition.
Cool, then show us that you have anything else. This is just playing word games. What you're describing is all the things that you're desperate to distance yourself away from. But that doesn't mean it's not what you're doing. You're just making excuses for why what you're doing doesn't look good to those on the outside. So you're just massaging the definitions so that the people who pay your salary would just keep doing it because they too really want to believe.
So what's faith then? It's something on the far side of reason. When reason has gone about as far as it can possibly go, it looks into a kind of alluring darkness.
Like what's in your head. Of course, what he said means absolutely nothing. This is just dictionary bingo, throwing words at the wall and hoping that something sticks in the minds of your followers. It's not the faithful that you have to convince, though. It's the skeptics. It's the people who reject everything that you have to say until you can back it up with demonstrable evidence. And you don't have any of that, so you just retreat back into your churches where nobody's going to ask you the hard questions. That's why they're just letting him talk. They're not holding him accountable for his words. I'm sure he wouldn't have shown up if he had to back any of this crap up.
Faith in ways like that, the full presence of God, is such that it overwhelms the mind.
Apparently, it makes your eyes roll back into your skull. I mean, seriously, nothing that he's saying is going to impress anybody with half a brain. What he's describing is fantasy. When you go beyond reason, you get to batshit insane. I'm pretty sure that if we weren't talking about gods, he'd reject the idea entirely. If we were talking about, say, I don't know, alien abductions, and he was told that you just have to go beyond your rational mind and just believe, he'd call bullshit, as he should. Or if you were talking about other gods and the Hindus or the Scientologists told him essentially the same thing, he'd balk at that. Why? Because this is reserved for his particular set of irrational beliefs, not for any other. It's why these people are so laughable.
And of course it does. And that shouldn't be surprising that God, ipsum esse, the sheer act of being itself, the creator of all things, that in whom essence and existence coincide, is not going to be definable by our minds. It won't fit into our minds.
Neither are a lot of things that are described by H.P. Lovecraft. That doesn't make any of it real. They were specifically invented to be unimaginably horrifying, entirely beyond the ability of humans to rationally contemplate. But that doesn't mean that there weren't books describing them, at least as far as normal language can manage. See, this just proves that Barron doesn't give a crap about the real world. Well, what would you expect from God? Well, evidence would be nice. Instead, he's just making up a load of horsepucky so he can say, I can't prove anything to you, but that's just how God is. Really? Prove it. How do you know any of that? This is just how religion works. Ridiculous made-up claims thrown around because fifis, and they figure we can't see straight through it. Unfortunately for them, we can.
So what does the mind want? Well, it wants the truth, and so it seeks it. It seeks it scientifically, psychologically, it seeks it through literature, it seeks it through philosophy. That's the beauty of the mind.
Sadly, he doesn't understand it at all. The mind doesn't seek truth, it seeks comfort. Largely, the brain has evolved to keep you in a perpetual happy land where you don't have to unnecessarily expend any energy because you're lazy. You've evolved to remain docile and quiet. That way, when you need that energy to survive, it's there. We can override that, though. We can get off our asses and get things done, and humanity has done that kind of thing forever, both for good and ill. People like Barron, though, they want you to turn off your brain and just believe, because that's where he gets his money. It's all a scam. Imagine my shock.
I'd be asking people not to close their minds, but to keep opening their minds.
Oh, good. Just like the idiots constantly injecting mind-altering substances into their body in the hopes that they might learn something. Yeah, of course, break your brain, see pretty colors, because you get pleasure out of it and that's it. That's essentially what Barron is pushing with an entirely different kind of mental poison. It's all, let's go beyond what we know works into a complete fantasy land designed to make you see things that aren't real and render your cognitive faculties moot. Yeah, hard pass on that.
I love the sciences, but I don't like scientism, which is the reduction of all knowledge to the scientific form of knowledge.
You mean that thing that doesn't actually exist? Scientism is a made up word. Well, I mean, all words are made up, but scientism, at least as it's used by the religious, is just complete nonsense. It's used as a pejorative because science doesn't support what the religious are trying to do. It's also used by a lot of woo-mongers for the exact same reason. You're not helping my scam, so I'm going to call you names. Yeah, okay. That doesn't mean anything, though. Science is the single best methodology that we currently have to discover objectively verifiable facts about the real world. Science is about getting to the truth. Religion is about getting to your wallet through your emotions. Of course, people like Barron don't like it because he relies on the religious scam to keep him from having to get a real job. That's the difference between knowledge and faith. One is demonstrable, and the other is just a whole load of made-up bullshit. Guess which side Barron falls on?
I love the sciences and their success in the technology they've delivered to us. But first of all, there's all kinds of other ways of knowing the truth about the world.
Such as, now keep in mind, I'm going to expect you to back that up in some kind of demonstrable, verifiable way. Anybody can say they have the truth. Only a credible person can prove it. And that's why when you look at scams near universally, they all say, well, of course we have the truth. Give me your money. Then, when you ask for their corroboratory evidence and they just make a bunch of excuses for why you don't need to see it, you just have to believe. You know, like religion. It's kind of funny how that all works, because all of these scams have the exact same things in common, right?
Hamlet doesn't have a bit of science in it, but Hamlet delivers to us profound truths about human life and about love and about frustration and about aspiration.
Not so much. I mean, you'd have to be a lot more specific, but I don't see any truths in it. It's got a lot of claims about humanity, but those are just claims. They're not truths. Truths are demonstrable. Barron doesn't seem to know the difference. Of course, that's often the problem. They're just using words to mean whatever they want them to mean in the moment, whatever it takes to keep stealing from the tragically gullible, and if claiming to have truth works, as unfortunately it seems to, then they'll do it without hesitation. That's, sad, right?
We got to open our minds beyond just a scientific vision of reality.
Because otherwise, Barron will have to take off his clerical collar and seek actual employment, and he doesn't want to do that. It's so much easier to just spew a bunch of bullshit from the pulpit and rake in the cash than it is to do anything demonstrably useful. It's why people like Barron exist.
So what I would say is religion doesn't close the mind. On the contrary, I'm opposed to any system that wants to shut down the spirit and say, no, that's all you can know.
Then he knows very, very little about the history of Catholicism, does he? That's what Catholicism has done for centuries. Just ask Galileo. Hell, how many were murdered for so-called heresy? That's a pretty healthy list. If you read the Catholic Encyclopedia, it states, with the formal recognition of the Church by the state and the increase of ecclesiastical penalties proportioned to the increase of ecclesiastical offenses, came an appeal from the Church to the secular arm for aid in enforcing of said penalties, which aid was always willingly granted. Deviations from the Catholic faith were made by the state to be punishable by civil law, and secular penalties were attached to them. Meaning, if you piss off the church and they have secular power, you tend to wind up very, very dead. That's why it's so important to keep the church and the state separate, because otherwise you get a whole lot of really obvious abuses.
No. Don't go beyond these limits. No, blow open the limits. Go beyond the limits. See, and that to me is language of faith, not infrational stupidity and superstition. No. But faith is this alluring horizon, this darkness beyond the light. And by God, yes, I want to keep opening that up for people.
Why? Because it's not real, at least not demonstrably so. Barron is a moron, but he's certainly not alone. He's not at all concerned about reality, only with his emotionally comforting fantasy land and his wallet. And no, I'm not going to stop talking about that because the Catholic Church is the world's biggest scam, raking in billions of dollars every single year, although exactly how much we'll never really know. Churches don't have to report their financial figures. Kinda convenient. We do know about how much money the Catholic Church has spent repaying victims of clerical pedophilia, and that according to Bishop Accountability, that's over $4 billion, with a B, billion, paid out through more than 8,600 cases, but even that is very likely underreported. The best estimates that we have at the moment place the wealth of the Vatican itself somewhere between $8 and $15 billion, and that's just a wild guess, really. And that says nothing at all about the individual churches and the dioceses around the world. They've got the money to pay the damages, but they still try to get out of it every single time that they can. It's guesstimated that they'll likely pay at least another $4 billion, with maybe another 5,000 cases likely, but nobody really knows. This could go on forever. They like to say, well, that was the past. But we know it's not the past. The Vatican and the churches are still trying to stifle all of the investigation into these cases. They are not embracing their wrongdoing and trying to make it right. They're a bunch of crooks. Maybe they ought to keep their dicks in their pants. Honestly, this is why people like Barron don't impress me. They'll say that they care about the truth, but their definition of the truth is very, very, very slippery and self-serving. It all comes off feeling really slimy. It doesn't matter if you're talking about the Catholics or somebody like William Lane Craig, they're all doing the exact same thing. It's all about getting the comfort and the cash that they want and taking advantage of the stupidity of the average person on the street. Because that's what this is, and that's what it's always been, and it is what it will always be. Kinda sad, right?